Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Friday, February 21st. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the NHL Four Nations Cup that saw Canada take the game in overtime. A great game for the sport of hockey, a great game just overall. In this segment, we turn our attention to the NFL, some coaching news and some front office news as the Saints have found their next defensive coordinator and the Jags have found their next GM. We're going to talk about who they are and if it was a good hire or not coming up in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday, February 21st. But like I was saying, we are going to get into some hiring news as the Saints have found their next defensive coordinator. And this is one that was kind of rumored for a while, ever since Kellen Moore was hired or pseudo-hired at this job for the New Orleans Saints. Him and Brandon Staley had been connected at the hip. Brandon Staley, of course, the former head coach for the Los Angeles Chargers and the former defensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams. Kellen Moore spent some time over there as the offensive coordinator under Brandon Staley when he was with the Chargers. That is why they were attached. But this is a really good move. We've talked for a little bit, and this is the sentiments that's been going around for a while, that typically the best duo for coaches is an offensive-minded head coach and a defensive coordinator that used to be a head coach. You get some of the leadership that comes with being a head coach, especially when it's a first-time head coach in Kellen Moore, a guy that is currently the youngest head coach in the NFL. He gets some leaderships, a guy that has been there, done that, especially going into a situation like the Saints that is the worst in the NFL. It's one of the worst situations a new coach has ever had to go into, and it's just good to have a guy with experience. I hope Kellen Moore continues to build his staff out like that. Brandon Staley obviously was not the most successful head coach when he was with the Chargers. He captained a lot of failures, a lot of big comebacks that he gave up as the head coach for the Chargers. And the Chargers, there's a legacy around them generally for being chokers in big moments, but Brandon Staley, it happened a lot to him, a little more proportionally than it did to other head coaches and their tenures as the head coach for the Chargers. Now, Brandon Staley's going to come in and he's going to continue to do what he did as the defensive coordinator for the Rams. Now, obviously he got a head coaching job off of that position. Every report out of that job when he was with the Rams said he was going to be a very good head coach, said that he was a very good defensive coordinator, obviously comes from a little bit of an offensive background as well. As a defensive coordinator, that can help you game plan a little bit, see what the offense is going to do, helps you adjust your defense a bit. All of that is important, but I think the most important thing for the Saints this season is to understand it's not going to be successful. If there's a Saints fan out there that expects the Saints to turn it around in one season, they're delusional. The Saints, as we'll go over actually in our next segment, have the worst cap space situation in the NFL, don't really have a future. It's not going to be an easy turnaround. That's why nobody wanted to take this job. But surrounding your new head coach in Kellen Moore with some guys that have experience, like Brandon Staley, hopefully they go and hire everybody else in the same kind of fashion, it should be really good for the Saints. The Saints need to hit the reset button, and getting a new head coach and a experienced defensive coordinator is the first step to doing that. But that's not the only move from around the NFL today. The Jaguars have found their next GM. Obviously, Trent Baalke was the previous GM for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was going to stay on. Owner Shad Khan had said that it's not a good idea to completely blow up the organization, to do a whole organization overhaul. It's not good for the future. But when Trent Baalke scared off not just one, but their top two coaching candidates in Ben Johnson and Liam Cohen, they knew it was time to go. Liam Cohen came back basically on the turn that Trent Baalke was fired. They fired Trent Baalke. Liam Cohen comes back for negotiations after originally he had said he was going to return to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, obviously, they needed to find their GM. They go out and get James Gladstone. James Gladstone was the head of scouting for the Rams and also a personal assistant to the GM for the Rams, Les Snead, over 9 years. He switched positions up and down, served 2 years as director of scouting, was a part of a lot of the negotiations that led to the Rams winning a Super Bowl, involving them trading for Matthew Stafford, making the big moves to go and get a Von Miller, making big moves to get everyone that was very important for that Super Bowl run. And the most important thing is the fact that he was able to be a part of a scouting squad, of a GM situation that didn't really have first round draft picks. After trading away a lot of their first round draft picks either to the Lions for Matthew Stafford or to move up to get Jared Goff, they were able to still be an incredibly successful team drafting in the later rounds. And that goes to the scouting department. Bringing in James Gladstone, who's going to be a first-time GM to go along with a first-time head coach, means that the organization has had that complete overhaul that Shad Khan was saying isn't good for the organization, but I think it is. I think they needed a complete overhaul in Jacksonville. You get to truly build around Trevor Lawrence now. You get to bring in guys that are there and share the same vision, which is very, very important when you're putting together a head coach and a GM. When those two guys are in line, in the same headspace, in the same ideals, it goes a lot better than when you have GMs and head coaches that are butting heads on everything. You've seen that happen with the Titans recently. They went from the 1 seed under Mike Vrabel to a team that has switched GM, switched head coach, switched GM, switched head coach over and over and over again in power struggles that just aren't working out for them. They also, I feel like, need a reset. They kind of did that this season. They've got the number 1 overall pick, but I really do like this hire of James Gladstone. We'll see how he is as a GM. Obviously, it's going to be a very important year this year in Jacksonville because this is a year that I think is, even though it's their first year as GM and head coach for Gladstone and Liam Cohen, these are guys that I think need to go in and show that they're going to grow immediately because Trevor Lawrence, after signing his 4-year, $55 million a year contract, is going to be under a lot of pressure, right? He's a guy that is already being labeled as a bust, was supposed to be the prince who was promised, right? The next big quarterback in the NFL, was incredibly successful at all levels until the NFL, and now he's been struggling. And I think that's to no fault of his own. But getting these guys in should be huge for the future of Trevor Lawrence, should be huge for the future of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I really do like the direction that both the Saints coaching staff is going in and that the Jaguars are going in. But we will see what happens as the NFL offseason really truly begins, upcoming soon, and the draft talk continues to go. But let me know what your thoughts are. What do you think about Brandon Staley being hired as the next defensive coordinator for the Saints? And what do you think about James Gladstone as GM for the Jaguars? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we continue our series of breaking down the off seasons for every single NFL team. What would a perfect off season look like this time for the New Orleans Saints? We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.